Hello and welcome to our special show to answer all your questions about the new tax announcements that were made in Budget 2023. I'm Priyanshi Sharma, and those tax announcements were really awaited for the last 4 years as there had been no changes since the year 2018. And the Finance Minister made a list of tax announcements in the budget and said that it'll bring relief to the taxpayers. But do the new proposals really save your money? Well, I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't confused with the new proposals and I didn't have questions. So we're going to ask your questions whether these changes mean anything for you. Do they change your taxation? How should you decide whether you should shift to the new tax regime or stick with the old tax regime? Should the budget really change the way you save or invest as well? We'll decode all those questions and more with experts in this show. First, let's just look at the top tax announcements that were made by the Finance Minister in the budget. Number one, the new regime income tax rebate has been hiked to 7 lakh rupees from 5 lakh rupees under the new tax regime. So if you opt for the new tax regime, there'll be no income tax that you'll have to pay for an income under 7 lakh rupees. Earlier, this amount was 5 lakh rupees. So that, the Finance Minister says, is a relief to the taxpayers. Number two, under the new tax regime, tax slabs have been cut from 7 to 5. Earlier, the taxation started from 2.5 lakh rupees. Now that has been increased to 3 lakh rupees. We'll explain those numbers in just a bit. Number three, new regime had no deductions earlier. You couldn't deduct any amounts under the new tax regime earlier, but now the standard deduction of 50,000 rupees has been extended from the old tax regime to the new tax regime as well. So that's a benefit that new tax regime is offering as the government plans to motivate more and more people to opt for this regime. Number four, the highest surcharge, which essentially is the charge on your income tax, that has now been cut to 25% versus 37% earlier. Remember that 37% was one of the highest in the world that our country had, and now that has been cut. Number five, the exemption on leave encashment has been hiked to 25 lakh rupees from 3 lakh rupees earlier, as there's been an increase in salaries as well, of course. Number six, the tax collection at source on foreign remittance transaction has been hiked to 20% from 5%. So this will apply to your overseas tour packages, your remittances, so those could get costlier. These are the broad changes, but how do they change your life? We welcome our experts to decode these changes for you. We have Mr. Barnik Maitra joining us, who's the Managing Partner of India and South Asia for Arthur D. Little. We also have with us Rajat Sethi, who is the advisor to the Manipur Chief Minister, who's also an economist and political analyst who supports the BJP, will be joining us in just a while. We also have Alok Agarwal, partner at Deloitte India, joining us. Nasir Salim, who's the managing partner at Flexi Capital, also joining us. We also have Sonu Iyer, our tax partner and national leader of personal advisory services at EY India. Thanks very much to all of you for joining us. Mr. Alok Agarwal, if I can start with you first. A lot of numbers and a lot of questions in everybody's mind. Now, the government says there are no losers and only winners when it comes to the new tax announcements. Is that true? Does the new rebate limit and the new slabs really benefit everybody? If I am a common taxpayer, which category do you think should I belong to if I have to avail the benefits under the new tax regime? Which category really benefits from these new announcements that have been made?
Sure. So, yeah, it would be fair to say that there are no losers if we are only comparing with the position as of last year and not really comparing with the old regime or the expectations. So the government has made the new regime more attractive by introducing the standard deduction of 50,000 as a part of the new regime. So that's one benefit. The second is they have, as you said, they have increased the rebate under Section 87A to 7 lakh rupees. So effectively, you are not paying any tax until that level of income. Then, they have reduced the number of slabs from 6 to 5. Instead of 2.5 lakh rupees in each slab, it's 3 lakhs. So what has happened is for the 12 lakh to 15 lakh rupees slab, there is actually a 20% tax rate now. So as compared to earlier, when it was 12.5 to 15 lakhs, it was 25%. So you could say there is a reduction under the new regime.
Right. And this is without deductions. Of course, the deductions part really varies from old to new tax regimes.
Yes. So we are really only comparing the new regime as it was before the budget and as proposed under the budget, where these changes are making the new regime more attractive But of course, the position remains that every taxpayer needs to look at his or her individual situation to determine whether the old regime is still better. So just to kind of round up the point I was making, the other change, of course, is the reduction of surcharge from 37 to 25 for the high income above 5 crores per annum. So that's again under the new regime, and there, because of the high income levels, a fair number of taxpayers would then benefit under the new regime, because effectively it comes down from 42.7 to 39%.
Right. So you're saying people falling in the tax bracket, in the income bracket of 12 to 15 lakhs will have to pay lesser tax under the new tax regime, which is proposed. But of course, you're comparing with the existing new tax regime. But now if we really compare with the old tax regime as well, because several people have questions whether they should really shift to the new tax regime, which one should they really choose? Sonu Iyer, if I can come to you on that, can you explain to us with examples how people should really choose between the old tax regime and the new tax regime in simple words? If you could also take us through the deductions under the new tax, under the old tax regime and the new tax regimes. How do they compare, and for which category of people would you recommend the new tax regime, and for which people would you recommend the old tax regime? How do people really choose in simple terms?
So it isn't a simple, straightforward answer. So the point is that new concessional tax regime or the new tax regime and the change proposed by the finance minister to make it more attractive has to be seen in the light that it is the directional tax slab that we are all headed towards. And we are making the change towards that. Therefore, the change is confusing and a little painful. But to answer your question, when you look at someone who's earning, say, a salary income of 7,50,000, total taxable income of 7 lakh rupees, and if they are salary earners, they're 7,50,000. For them, it's a no-brainer. You can move straight away to the concessional tax regime or the new CTR. Because at that level, you are not going to pay any tax at all, because the rebate has been enhanced from 5 lakhs to 7 lakhs.
Right.
Then you come to different categories of people. Really, it will depend on people whose total income is over 5 crores, who were paying tax at 42.744. As you pointed out, because of the reduction in surcharge to 25%, the effective tax rate is coming down to 39%. So that category of taxpayers can also move straight away. Then when you have people in between, you're really looking at people who have minimal deductions, maybe they're not taking as many deductions under the old tax regime. For them also, it will make a case to move to the new tax regime. The others who are taking some tax regimes, it will be an evaluation of their individual circumstances. Because that break-even point, which everybody has been struggling between yesterday's budget announcements to today, to find out what is that magic number at which people should look to shift to the new concessional tax regime, is perhaps something that is dependent on each one's individual circumstances, the amount of deductions they are taking. Now, if you're someone who's taking the full benefit of ATC, where you have the investment in LIC, bank deposits, you have PPF, you have repayment of housing loan, you pay NPS contributions where you get another additional 50,000. You are paying a house rent allowance, and you have a certain amount of deductions which are, say, going over 4,25,000. Then you are definitely in that borderline area where you may want to evaluate whether you want to continue to be in the existing tax regime. But really depends on the quantum of deductions that you've been claiming under the existing tax regime and versus the new tax regime, where your deductions would be limited. You won't get any deductions, because standard deduction between the existing tax regime and the new concessional tax regime is the same. So then you are neutral to that. All other deductions is what will make the difference in decision, whether you want to stay on or you want to move. But the important point for all of us to remember is that the new concessional tax regime is the default tax regime, as the finance minister pointed out.
Right.
So now the employer will have to withhold tax, assuming that this is the tax slab that is applicable, no deduction, unless the employee exercises an option and tells the employer that I would like to continue under the existing tax regime.
That's
I
really
hope that
important,
answers
as
your
you
question.
point out, that the default has been the new tax regime. So if at all you want to take the old tax regime, if you think that benefits you, you'll have to specifically opt for that. So that's important to highlight. But of course, unfortunately, as you mentioned, there's no magic number. It's a situation of each their own. You'll have to see whether your deductions are higher and then opt for the old tax regime. If they're not too much, then the new tax regime might benefit you. So that's one way to put it. So if this really is the case, Rajat Sethi, if I can come to you, the finance minister and the government really aims to promote the new tax regime through this. We know that the new tax regime hasn't had many takers ever since it was announced in 2020. So this was a move to motivate people to choose the new tax regime. But as we've pointed out, that it really depends on people's own cases, their own deductions. So how will this really motivate more and more people to come to the new tax regime when it does not objectively benefit all people, or most people also, in fact?
Priyanshi, such a complex tax regime would certainly be creation of some Babu who would have thought that adding more layers of complexity is perhaps going to increase the revenues. I think this is only piece of the budget which I principally feel is not in tune with the changing times. The easier the structure, the better compliance you will get and the better tax collection will be. Therefore, I mean, as you said, the vision of some of the bureaucracy here involved in this planning would have been that it's a slow glide path to a regime where you don't give any subsidies, you just have a flat taxation structure and everybody falls in place and follows that. Perhaps that was a thinking, but at the end of the day, the taxation product that we have in front of us is this mumbo jumbo. It's a super complex thing that so many partner level folks that are out in your show, they're finding it hard to sort of comprehend and explain it to a layman. I just wish luck that people are able to navigate through this. They will have to use all these online softwares that are available to see that whether the old regime or the new regime is going to favor them, and pick up their bits, whichever regime sort of gives them more financial benefits.
And that's in fact why we had to do this show, because people had so many questions. So Mr. Banik Mehta, if I can come to you on this, should there be any changes in the way that people park their funds now and people invest, considering that the tax for insurance has been changed, and insurance of course was a popular way to park funds for many Indians, considering that markets are also highly volatile, inflation is rising, so money is losing value while it's staying in your bank. So should there be a change in the way Indians should invest, taking cues from the budget 2023?
So I think the spirit of putting everything within the taxation ambit is to not allow taxes to decide where you invest your money in, which I think is the entire philosophy behind this. I think the real winners of this budget are the chartered accountants who will be in very heavy demand to figure out taxes and what regime to take.
Right.
But I think in general, I think consistency of taxation applied to different categories of securities, everything gets taxed at source and everything has a consistent remit, is a good answer for India. I think there is no reason for the taxman to decide whether I would invest more in category A of securities or category B of securities. So I would welcome the move. I think at the end of the day, anyone who's looking to make an investment should look at the return profile of the investment, look at the net return after deducting for taxes, and it's going to look similar across a lot of categories, and choose the instruments which meet their longer-term financial needs in terms of liquidity and also return.
So do you think that the changes in the insurance taxation, that could probably hamper the tax-saving factor that existed with insurance in the existing manner?
Yes, absolutely. It should, because in general, the insurance products and the unit-linked insurance products actually are not very high return or high yielding products. So I think the tax advantage skewed the market for people to take it, because you would get 2-3% incremental return as a tax benefit. So I think in that sense, again, if you have a uniform tax across all kinds of products, then you will choose the best product. So the market for insurance products will get muted. If there are better insurance products which give better market-linked returns, and that will get picked in the portfolio. Again, importantly, tax will not be the determining factor on where you park your money, but the intrinsic value of the security and the return profile of the security.
Right. Nasir Salim, would you agree with that? Tax should not be the determining factor, and also the point that we talked about on insurance, that the tax exemptions on high-value life insurance proceeds has been limited, and now only the income from life insurance policies with a premium of less than 5 lakh will be exempt, and beyond that it won't be exempt. So do you think that this could demotivate people from making large investments in life insurances?
Priyanshi, good evening, firstly, and to all your viewers. I think, to your point, we are very happy as wealth managers and as, wealth practitioners. I'll tell you why, Priyanshi. We've been advocating the fact that investing and insurance policies are two separate heads, and they need to be treated separately. Right now, obviously, this is a no-brainer that the government is trying to push for, trying to do away with the taxation advantages that ULIPs had given in the past. Because a lot of clients we saw, and I can tell you this, being with a large private sector bank as well, that I was a part of, a lot of insurance products was being solicited. And now, obviously, those will change, and for the right reasons. I completely agree with my fellow panelists to say that, it doesn't augur well to choose products on account of taxation liabilities. I think it's a matter of risk-adjusted returns. Every investor needs to choose the right mix of products depending on the risk profile that they have.
Right.
And also, Priyanshi, one last thing, one quick thing on this. You see, we also feel that the underlying investing in these insurance policies, for example, since you raised that point, Priyanshi, is equity. So if one needs to invest, and if you have the right appetite, and if you're in the right life age cycle, you should be looking at equity as an asset class. And, we're a great proponent of that because we feel that, time-adjusted, risk-adjusted returns are far more favorable in equity-oriented, options for clients where they have a longer time horizon and they understand all the risks associated with it.
Right. So, of course, as you said, that it'll have to be decided on people's own cases. And I think that's really important to point out in such an environment where financial advice is so easily available on the internet that people really tend to believe what they see on Instagram or on Facebook. So it's really important for you to understand your case and then decide which regime you want to choose or which investment source you want to choose. Alok Agarwal, if I can come to you on this, our viewers also sent us their questions, and the confusion really was that which regime is more beneficial, and that we've discussed that it depends on which deductions you have, what income tax bracket you fall in. But let's talk about examples now that will really be relatable to our viewers. Now, some say that for those with an income of 9 lakh rupees, with deductions under the old tax regime, the entire income actually comes under the taxable rebate. So it was tax-free if somebody has 9 lakh rupees of income. But under the new tax regime, it will have a tax of 45,000 rupees. Is this true? This is an example that's been doing the rounds over the internet recently. So for some people, the new regime might actually be worse. Are there some cases where shifting to the new regime might actually be worse for some people?
Yes, Priyanshi. So as we have discussed, some exemptions which are available under the old regime are not available under the new regime. For example, let's take a simple common one like house rent allowance, apart from the ones we've already discussed, ATC, etc. So you can easily have a situation where somebody is at those income levels who will remain better off under the old regime. But having said that, I just wanted to, kind of focus on a point which you alluded to, that if you independently look at the situation, then the rates, effective rates under the new regime, without comparing the old regime, is not too bad. Because as the FM also highlighted with examples, at an income of 9 lakh rupees, you have an effective tax of 45,000, which is 5%.
Right.
At an income of 15 lakh rupees, you have a tax of 1.5 lakh rupees, which is 10%.
But sorry to interrupt you there. For a 9 lakh rupee income, how much would you be paying under the old tax regime if you took all the exemptions, all the deductions that would be available? Just to make a comparison between old
and new. So if I just take a broad, number, if you're, let's say, taking exemptions, deductions which are not available under the new regime of 4.25 lakhs, then at most income levels, you will be better off under the old regime. So, but if we start looking at specific income levels, especially if we go down below 15 lakhs, below 10 lakhs, then this number keeps changing. But the point is, like, 4.25 lakhs is a number where at many income levels, you will be better off under the old regime. And that's not a very big number if you look at HRA and if you look at ATC, ATD, etc. So it's absolutely valid, the point from the viewer, that you could have these situations where the tax under the old regime is lower than the new regime.
So somebody with an income of 9 lakh rupees could actually be in a situation where they pay no tax at all under the old tax regime. There could be a situation like that.
Absolutely, there could be situations.
Right, but of course, under the new tax regime, they'll have to pay 45,000 because, as we've pointed out, that the deductions in old tax regime are definitely more attractive than in the new tax regime. Now, Sonu Iyer, if we talk about more examples here, for people who fall in the 5 to 7 lakh income bracket, they come under the limit under the new tax regime, but not the old tax regime. So, is the new one beneficial for this bracket? We've talked about which bracket the new one might not be beneficial for, but for which bracket do you think the new one benefits, especially for the people falling in that bracket of 5 to 7 lakh rupees, because the old tax regime exemption limit is 5 lakh, while under the new tax regime it's been increased to 7 lakh.
Absolutely, Priyanshu, you answered it. So anyone who falls in this category should make the switch to the new tax regime. And on a lighter note, I was like, I don't know when the last time you were all doing our mental maths while you put up the numbers, no calculators in hand, and you're just saying, okay, this is what would work. But on a serious note, it is still the point that everybody needs to do their own evaluation.
Right, and that of course is really important to point out. And Nasir Salim, if I can come to you on the last question, there has been an increase in the TCS, the tax collection on source on foreign remittance transaction, and that has actually been hiked to 20% from 5%. Now, this increased TCS will apply to your overseas tour packages as well and your remittances as well. So, for the common viewer, what does this mean? Is my next foreign vacation is going to get more expensive with this new tax change?
So ideally, this comes under the RBI provision of LRS, which is basically liberalized remittance scheme. And we see a lot of money which has now started to chase international assets, and whether it's in the form of real estate, for example, or monies which are moving in for international investing through various platforms. And I think, the endeavor is very clear that whatever money that goes out, and it's also very important the timing of this, because typically there's a lot of these happening in a financial year, and it's typically towards the January, February, March quarter of every financial year, right? And there's a big rush in that. So just to your viewers, broadly speaking, if you were sending $100,000 US, it will attract a 20% TCS, which will get deducted before the money goes out from your bank account, which is provisioned by the RBI, and that will get reflected under your bank number. So I think it's a very simple procedure, but obviously, does it impact you for your international vacations? Not really, because you will not be sending money to under the LRS program. Of course, it does qualify under that, but if you take money under the LRS, and that's only when this will attract a 20% TCS. Under the basic travel quota, it will not qualify. And also, I must tell you, Pranchi, further clarifications yet to come in, but they've notified that this will not attract for education for your children, overseas education, and it will not come in, it will not get attracted in case of also health expenses. Right. So that the government has also been very, very clearly and notified.
So that's definitely a relief that my travel is not going to get more expensive, foreign education is not getting more expensive, and neither are your health expenses in other countries. It's only remittances that will be taxed. The taxation for that has been hiked. So that clarification definitely is really important. Thanks very much to all of you for joining us.
And that on TCS, sorry, I'm jumping in, but on TCS, it's important to note this is not cash lost or money lost. This is something that will be eventually adjusted against the tax liability. So to that extent, it is not additional cost to the taxpayer. This will be adjusted against the total tax bill. It is just one of the ways in which government is collecting tax at source. Right. So for a regular taxpayer, this is not a loss. It's a cash flow issue, certainly, but it's not cash loss.
Right. So that's definitely a relief. Thanks very much for joining us and clarifying all of those questions. We hope that all of these answers answered some of your questions and made you better equipped to choose whether you want to go for the old tax regime, whether you want to go for the new tax regime, and answered your questions about all the new tax announcements that the Budget 2023 had. Thanks very much for watching. Good night.